Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Founders Club podcast. My guest today is Ash Maurya. Hello, Ash. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. I'm so excited about this podcast, as I was telling you before, because let me give you a little bit of background of how I heard about you the first time, and I'll tell you why I'm excited. So the first time when I heard about you was I was doing some research in, I think it was 2015. I was doing some research about startups and books to learn resources that's out there that I could learn from. And I came across your book, which was Running Lean
Sure.
time. And I was like, I found the book, I bought the book. And also if you can give us what's the origin story of Lean Canvas in general? Was it before
Sure.
you published the book or was it afterwards?
Yeah. So I often like to tell people that the book was never part of my plan. It was not a master plan to be an author. I was really an entrepreneur just like you. Um, and I got sucked into writing the book because I was trying to make sense of this crazy world of startups and entrepreneurship myself. So I had built many products before that, but the thing that bothered me was that every product in the beginning sounds amazing, but after a few months, sometimes a few years, you realize maybe not so amazing because no
That's a
one's using
fallacy that every entrepreneur falls
it.
into.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the honeymoon period. You fall in love with your idea. And
Exactly.
I was doing the same thing. And so I did get some successes, but what bothered me the most was not knowing in the beginning which idea is good and bad. They all look good. So that was what prompted me to start looking for better ways. And so I decided to write a blog, and it was really more like lessons learned, what I was learning as I was running my own companies. And around that time, that's when also Eric Ries, Steve Blank, some of those folks your audience may know, began to talk about what became the Lean Startup later on. But what they were saying seemed to connect with a lot of my experiences. And so I listened to them. I started um, commenting on their posts and did some talks in their events. And that's how I got sucked in. So I was really blogging about my experiences, and I decided I would turn a lot of my learnings into some case studies, and that built up an audience. And that's how the book really came out at the end. Some of my own readers said, could you like take some of your posts and turn it into a book? It will be a good book. So I said, okay. And so I kind of went through this process, and that's how the books came about. So the funny story there is that even to this day, I get people who just discover the book and say, I wish I read your book, 5, 10 years ago. And I still reply saying, me too, because everything in that book is all the things that I learned by doing things the exact opposite way. So making all the mistakes. And so the book is really a collected, you can say, wisdom from bad experience to try to maybe help the next generation of entrepreneurs not make those mistakes. They can make new ones, but not at least those ones. The second question was Lean Canvas. So Lean Canvas also was a bit of an accidental discovery. So while I was blogging and doing research for the book, one of the things I was looking for was a more effective way to capture risky assumptions, because a lot of our framework is about, when you have an idea, don't start with the easiest thing, start with the riskiest thing. And so I actually had a spreadsheet going, and that's how I was ranking my risks. I one day ran into the business model canvas, and it was kind of interesting, but I put it away. And then one entrepreneur was using it in a way to identify, he was changing the canvas and kind of changing the boxes. And I thought that was interesting. And I didn't know I could change the business model canvas. And then I saw it was licensed in such a way, Creative Commons. So
Do you remember exactly what he was changing in the canvas and what was the aha moment for you? What sparked you and like the idea to revamp
yeah,
the
so
whole idea of canvases?
Yeah, so his name was Rob Fitzpatrick, and I actually have a blog post in because again I documented everything that I was doing a lot around those times. And so when I discovered his work, his name was Rob Fitzpatrick. He had gone in and changed some of the boxes, which were more for later stage startups. He was trying to make it more practical for early stage startups, and that's what he had. And I don't remember the exact boxes, but I think if you go to the blog post, you can find a link to his version as well. And then I found that what he did was kind of a step in the right direction. And I took that even further. And I said that I still want to change some boxes. And so I added customer, problem, and solution, because that's how I think. Whenever you have an idea, you have to ask yourself, who is going to be my customer and what problem do I solve with my solution? So that's how I was thinking at the time. And so I made those changes and I published it in a blog post, and that blog post just had like a lot of comments, and it just took off. Like that was one of the most, and even to this day, I think now it's maybe less so, but for a long time it was the top blog post on the site. So that's what sparked the Lean Canvas as you can say as an experiment, as an accidental discovery. And I saw that people were using it, and I began to use it more. So I started developing it further, and that's how it got developed to where it is today, and it got put into the book. Running Lean kind of mentions it. So when you were asking the order, it's hard to say which came first. It was really the blog, and while I was researching the book, the Lean Canvas got built. So the funny story there is that in the first edition of the book, I had an example Lean Canvas, and it was on the book itself. Like I have a case study on how I wrote the book using the techniques in the book, and I also have a Lean Canvas on Lean Canvas. So it's a bit meta recursive.
Yeah, I was really curious to know about this, because when I was reading the book, you mentioned in the book itself, you try to show with a real example use case of Lean Canvas, exactly, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
And I was like curious, which one came first, and how was interesting for me. So going more into depth, what is exactly Lean Canvas, and what is the difference with the predecessor, which is the typical business model canvas? Can you walk us through the differences and how it differentiates itself?
Yeah, and if I even go, like some people who know business model canvas ask the question, what's the difference between the two? But I think the bigger kind of predecessor is the business plan. So traditionally, when we have had an idea, we have been asked to write a business plan. And I start there because the best way to describe a Lean Canvas is it's almost like a one-page business plan. The problem with business plans is that they take too long to write. And by the time you write it and make up all the stories in it, nobody even reads it because they want to hear.
Do you think, I mean, in schools, especially in business schools, they teach a lot of how to write a business plan. And I think this is so outdated. Why didn't they teach something more easier, that it's more practical?
It's changing. So there are, I mean, there's still going to be schools that are teaching your traditional, and some of it's like your old school business school professors who think that's the only thing that one needs to do. But definitely it's changed. Like in the last 10 years since these canvases have come out, there's a lot of change. We work with a lot of universities that are teaching, even high schools are teaching Lean Canvas to early students as a way to capture their idea. So the power of the canvas is that it's the opposite. It's much faster to write, and it's a bit like Lego pieces. Just like when you're building, you can use Lego to build. You've seen some of these things, and if you go to Legoland or you see these amazing things people can build with Legos. But you can also start with some very simple models, and so that's the power of the canvas. Is you can describe a very complex business model, but you can also start very simple. And that's the appeal of it, is that you can start simple and then describe something more complex, while a business plan is just a document that is very old fashioned. It's people don't read it. And even if they do, then they expect it to be, made up of all these perfect analysis. And it's very hard to know that in the early stages of a startup. So to me, that was the original alternative that the Lean Canvas helps to kind of replace. Is you don't need to do an elaborate business plan. You can start quickly with the Lean Canvas, and then the big piece here is iteration. Is that there's no business model out there or no idea out there that doesn't change by the time it's done. It's like evolution. We start with version 1, but by the time you get to product market fit, usually you build something very different. And so the Lean Canvas is more of a snapshot than it is trying to build that perfect model. The question you had asked, the difference between Lean Canvas and business model canvas, there is it's more of a paradigm difference. Like the way those that are familiar with business model canvas, I find it's more applicable to describe mature existing businesses. So if you have a mature business and you're trying to document what is your business model about, like who are your partners, what are your key activities, what are the resources that you have, you can use that to do it. But when you are in an early stage startup, when you're trying to create magic, something out of nothing, you don't have those things yet. So there, the Lean Canvas is more applicable because it helps you focus in on markets, like who's your customer, what's the unmet need, how do you get to market? And one day when you get all those things, those other things become obvious, like your unfair advantages or your key resources.
Do you think it's easier to start a B2C or a B2B startup? And in which context, or more broadly, in which industry do you see a better fit to use canvases?
Right. So It may not be a very fair question, because for the first thing is that every business is hard, and there are pros and cons. So if I look at a B2C side, on the pro side, the reason that it's appealing is that there are usually a lot more consumers out there. And so testing is a bit easier. If I was doing a B2C startup, I can do, digital tests. I can put up a landing page, drive traffic, use Facebook, all these things. But on the flip side, the con side is that because it is so easy to do it, everyone's doing it. So there's a lot more competition. If I'm trying to build a B2C product, like, a new type of a phone or a new type of whatever, an app, a phone app, there's just always so much competition. So you have to still stand out in the noise. On the B2B side, it's the other story, which is if you're going further upstream, maybe not as many customers, but you still have to stand out, and it's harder to reach those customers. So it's always a function of, there are trade-offs. I don't think that one is necessarily easier than the other, but the business models are effectively different. When you're doing B2C, not always, but typically you're trying to get a lot more customers at lower price points. So it's a different kind of scaling game. If you're doing B2B, it usually is hunting for higher priced customers, and the channels are not as scalable. So it's more like sales, and things become more manual.
Mm-hmm. In your book Running Lean, you talk about the fact that before reaching product market fit, there are like two stages that needs to be taken into account. Which are problem solution fit and product launch fit. And I think this is so important, but at the same time, so misunderstood by many entrepreneurs and founders. So can you talk more about this, and what do you mean by problem solution fit and product launch fit?
Yeah. So I think most people understand product market fit as the right part of the hockey stick curve where everything is working, and we all want to get there. The problem is that getting there is the very hard part. And so I broke those into those two sub stages so that the process can be a bit more systematic. So when you have an idea, problem solution fit is before you even build, you want to make sure that there is a market for that idea. So traditionally, the way we do this is we build a product, then we try to sell it. And if it doesn't sell, we then try to fix the product. And that takes a lot of time, because people usually spend 6 months to 9 months building a product. In problem solution fit, which is the first stage, we tell people don't build anything. First, try to sell your demo. Like go in and show an offer, show a Kickstarter page, show a landing page, go and pitch your customers. If they don't buy your pitch, then they're not going to buy your product. So why build it? So that's kind of, it sounds very commonsensical, but it's something that when people hear it, they're like, oh, this is, I never knew I could do that. But it happens all the time. People buy your demo, they don't buy your solution in the beginning. So problem solution fit is all about first proving that there is a big enough market. So you need to not just sell it to one person. If I have a new idea and I come to you and say, will you buy it? And you say yes, that may be great, but one person's not enough. I need to go and now find 10 other people who might say the same thing. And then maybe it's not 10, maybe it's 100. So those numbers will come from, again, the pricing and your goals and the kind of product you're building. To make that concrete, the book that I wrote, I decided I was going to write this book, but I didn't start writing it until I got some commitments first. So I put up a landing page, and my goal was I needed to get 1,000 email addresses, because that would convince me that if I wrote this book, some percentage of those would buy, and that would be worth doing. I built too many products. One of my mantras is life's too short to build something nobody wants.
And I love it.
Yeah. So that's this whole problem solution fit, is make sure that when you build it, people will buy it. So why don't you sell it before you build? So that's problem solution fit. And then before getting to product market fit, there's a second stage, which is getting your product ready for learning. Because again, when people will often do some research, understand their customers and market, and then they launch the product and have no way of measuring, like if it's working, if it's not working, and they only count revenue. They only count, how much money they're making. And when the money doesn't come, then you don't know what's working or not working. So in the lean startup and a lot of running lean, there's a very big emphasis on metrics. And so product launch fit is getting ready for that, like building the infrastructure. And so maybe a good example could be even Tesla. Like when you look at Tesla, the way they build their cars, very different from any other car company. They sell you their car, and then they use software to improve the car, and they're adding features, but they are also measuring a lot of data. So that piece there, they spend extra time to build that infrastructure. And that's what product launch fit is to some extent.
Mhm. Yeah, I recognize some parts of what you're saying, and I think I'm not sure. Maybe it's Paul Graham that talks about pre product market fit. You have to do a lot of things that don't scale. Mainly, you have to do those things manually,
Yep.
and to some extent, I can take in account when I think about this. I think about how we in our side found our first users. So first, our startup. We were targeting students in China trying to learn Chinese, but by talking with them, doing demos, and trying making them to use the app and taking those feedback, what we notice is that actually that's not our target users because we don't solve a problem, an urgent problem for them. And what we did was pivoted towards professionals, not anymore students that work in China, don't have time to go to school. So we offer a solution that was more time efficient and result oriented and more efficient.
Yep.
And this is so important, but many founders have a hard time to go outside and do those things that don't scale, such as talking with their customers, trying to understand what is the problem. And at some point, it's even difficult to dissect your idea from the problem that you try to solve, because the problem could be totally different than what's your solution that you're trying to build, or the other way around. And this is so misunderstood, and I see it over and over, especially for first-time entrepreneurs. But I guess, as you mentioned, everyone has to go through the pain of learning this.
It's a mindset shift. So I even started giving it a name. I call it the innovator's bias or the entrepreneur's bias for their solution. And that is that when we see an idea, we quickly think of a solution and fall in love with it. And then everything is a biased lens. So whenever we see, it's the hammer problem. If you already decided you want to build a hammer, then everywhere you look, you see nails, right? Everything looks like a nail to you, and you try to fit it into your story. And that's just how we humans work. The way we evolve is we have biases. There's all kinds of biases you can read about on the web. But to be successful, yes, as an entrepreneur, if you want to build what customers want, not what you want, then you have to see the world from their eyes. And that's a mindset shift that takes time to develop, but it happens. People will get there.
Is there like a faster way to get rid of those biases? Like how do you do it? It's almost like impossible.
I think with coaching, I think there is, and so this is where so for people to change, there has to be a trigger, right? So some of the triggers are intrinsic. So you might launch a product, and as we said, we all expect it to work. But so if I go and talk to somebody when they just launched, they're going to be like, I don't want to talk to you because your stuff is for people who fail. I'm not going to fail. But you wait 2 months, you wait 3 months, and then they'll be willing to talk to you because it's like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. Can you help in helping me get in the right track? So there's going to be a trigger, and that's a triggering event when we begin to realize that statistics applies to everyone. You know, the probability, that's another bias, probability bias. We all think that bad things happen to others will not happen to us. And then those on the other spectrum, you know, people are afraid of flying, even though flying is safer than driving, but that's another example of those probability biases. So there, again, that's another kind of a bias. But where that can be accelerated is also through coaching. We have over the years built up a platform where we bring startups in and we start them up with their ideas, but slowly through coaching, we can ask certain questions which start to change their mindsets. And it's like a simple thing, like, you know, you're building this product for 9 months, you have a demo, why don't we start with that? Why don't we sell your demo first? And it makes sense. So they go and try it. And when it doesn't work, they begin to ask questions, which is, if people didn't buy my demo, they wouldn't buy my product. I need to fix this. So you can create those learning moments, but it does take some coaching and effort.
Right. Going back or going more broadly on a macro level, there is like two main stages in a startup, in the lifetime of a startup. And one we mentioned about is pre-product market fit, and the other is post-product market fit. And those two changes are really, really different in terms of metrics, in terms of job that has to be done, and many other things. What are the early metrics that the founders should pay special attention, especially pre and post, uh, product market fit. Do you have any that you think are the best one we should?
Right. So I guess from a metric standpoint, I still like to believe as long as the business model doesn't change, the true north metric, the traction metric, does not change. So if we look at even a company like Facebook, what they were tracking when Mark Zuckerberg was in the college dorm room, daily active users and click-through rates, is still what they're tracking today on the core business model. So the metrics don't change, the scale changes, but definitely the focus of the entrepreneurs change. So what they're doing changes a lot. So pre-product market fit, it's a lot about learning. You're changing the product because you don't, it's just like in your example, you start with idea number one, you pivot, you're changing the product because you're trying to make that metric kind of go up and to the right. And it may be not the product you start with, but something else. So there's a lot of learning. So learning is essentially the insights that you learn help you build a different product which can make those metrics work. Post product market fit, the goal is more on scaling. So it's less about product innovation. You're not trying to build new things, even though we're always improving the product, but it's less about new value proposition and more about scalability. So it's more about engines of growth, channels, those types of things.
You mentioned the example of Facebook. The true North Star metric is daily active users. So it's obviously because their business model is based on more customers, more people they have on the website, better it is because more ads they will sell. But sometimes it's not so easy to identify what is your true North Star metric. Is there a formula, or is there a way to easily identify? Because I remember in our case was basically in our platform, users will go there, will have a lesson with the teacher, and then the content, the language content thought will be captured by our AI system, processed, and they'll have to go back and review to learn the language. So it's like a almost two-stage product, and it was not how many students will go and review the content, but how many. Well, it was not how many students will do the lesson with the teacher, but how many students will go back and review the content and then rebook a lesson. So it was very hard for us to understand which metric should we look at and optimize for. Is there a solution to identify the North Star metric?
Well, so what you're talking about is a bit more of the leading indicator, like we call it. So that would be more of like the aha metrics or the aha moments, like which ones cause the true north. But to me, the true north is obvious. Like from what I understand of your business model, it's a marketplace model. So you've got maybe students and instructors, and there's some transaction that's happening. So usually in marketplace models, the number of transactions is really the initial metric to be looking at. So if I look at Airbnb, at the end of the day, if they have more guest nights booked this quarter versus last quarter, as an investor, I'm happy because I know that their business is growing. Now, what I don't know is how do they make more? How do they grow more? Or what is causing that? That's the big, sometimes $1 billion question, which is doing that kind of analysis. It's not an easy answer because it will be many inputs. Like Facebook, for example, even though I say it was driving traffic, what they found is that the number of friends people created in the first 10 days was very important because that correlated with a lot of engagement. So if you came on Facebook and you got 10 friends in 10 days, your engagement was 2-3 times as higher than the other person who may have less than 10 friends. So they optimize for that. So when you would sign up on Facebook before, you would have a blank screen and you would sign up and you'd be there by yourself and you start friending a few people. Now they recommend friends. I think most people are already on there, but if you sign up today, they know who your friends are before you even tell them. And so they start recommending people to you. And so that was a way of optimizing for a user behavior that led to their traction metric, which was more engagement. So that's why I said there are kind of two flips. So to me, the traction metric doesn't change, but what's causing it, that is like the big question. And that's where a lot of experimentation needs to get done to try to understand what's making that thing go up.
Yeah, Facebook, obviously, they leverage also the fact of network effects. More of my friends are on the platform, more I'll benefit, more they'll benefit themselves. So yeah, so I guess you have to, what the message here is, do you have to watch closely and tightly what kind of business model do you have, and based on that, analyze what could be the possible metrics you should look at.
That's exactly right. And the business model can change. So I think also in your story, I heard you mention AI, and I bring
Yeah,
that up just because,
it changed over
right.
time.
And I bring that up because AI takes time because AI has to be fed. There needs to be a lot of data points, and so your initial business model cannot be a big data play because you don't have enough data yet. It has to be something more around something more basic, like I want to learn a language, and it might be using human to human interactions to start the business model. And someday down the road in your stage 2 or stage 3, you say we don't need the instructors because our AI can do that, right? So that's a second version of your business model.
That was actually our assumption. So we thought we build a platform where a teacher can create content and then students will find that content and learn. But actually, by doing experiments, what we found interesting is that um, students don't want generic content; they want personalized content, language content, right? So especially if your language level is higher, you want to personalize more and more your knowledge, like a pyramid.
Yep.
And but the question was like, we don't have a very powerful engine to create content, AI engine to create content for each student, but we can leverage the teachers. So teacher can do an online teach a lesson with the students, and then the system will process all the sentences and words that are taught, and then basically the data and create this personalized content. And that
Yep.
was hard to test because it involved different players, different stakeholders. We have to find teachers, then we have to make sure that time slots are open. It's like, and those are like some of early things or that we did, which didn't scale at the time. Obviously, we
Sure.
engineered the process, and it's really important for us to get the users to the aha moment, because there is no product like where you have a lesson with the teacher, but then the content is in the app, and then you can review it anytime, everywhere, whenever you want on your phone. And yeah, going back to our conversation, the what are the three most recurrent reasons that most product fail? And more broadly, as a founder and entrepreneur, what is your take on failure in general?
Yeah. Yeah. So I do think it's a two-part question, but the reason that most products fail, like to me, it comes down to one thing, which is we just build the wrong product, and then we can get into many root causes. Part of it is some of the things I talked about is we fall in love for too long with a particular solution, and we waste needless time, money, and effort building something that is eventually going to fail. And then it only takes only when it fails and we are ready to accept that do we start iterating and pivoting and testing. So that's why like what we try to teach is let's not build the product even, let's find the riskiest thing. Let's actually try to make it fail as quickly as possible so we can get on the right track faster. So I'd rather get the bad news in 5 days than 5 months. So if I know that a customer is not going to pay $1,000 for my product, let me test price today and tell them, here's the demo. Will you buy it for $1,000? If they say no, you're crazy, I know that okay, I have a problem. I can go ahead and try to fix that or pivot away from that.
Yeah,
So that's a bit of
sometimes they even may not respond to your proposal.
yeah
They just disappear like this, fade away.
yeah
And that's
yeah.
actually it's a good indicator for you to ask yourself, how urgent is this problem for this person that I'm trying to solve? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. And this is where like that kind of objectivity is so important because people tell me people won't buy my product now because it's not ready. And that is you lying to yourself because they may not buy it, but they will at least commit to buying it, right? So they may not give you money because it's not ready, but they can say, I love it. They can give you a letter of intent. They can sometimes pre-order, they can do all of those kinds of things. So that's what we teach
Happened to
people.
me, to be honest.
Yeah, but people, it's so easy to say, I'm just going to wait because you don't want to be rejected. But that's why we have to push that up front. But to your point of failure, if you think, whenever I ask entrepreneurs, do you think you're doing something that needs to be breakthrough to win? And everyone says yes, because if I don't do something breakthrough, then there's so much competition, I'm not going to stand out. And then I ask them, what does breakthrough mean? Is it based on something that you know is going to happen or something that you don't know is going to happen? If you look at the dictionary definition of breakthrough, it requires some kind of unexpected discovery, some insight that you uncovered that nobody else uncovered. You can't do that without failure. You can't do that without trying something and it not working, because that's where the insight is hidden. So it's a bit counterintuitive, but when people see failure, they run away from it because that's we're wired to do that. That's just our human condition. But as an entrepreneur, you should run towards failure in the early stages, because that's where everyone else, when they hit the failure, they turn around and leave. But that's where you find something truly interesting and amazing. So I mean, there are many startups. You look at Airbnb. You know, they started out doing something very risky. Every investor told them their idea was dumb; it would never work. Because how can you rent a stranger's room when the stranger is living in the other room next to you, and vice versa? That just sounds so weird. And so, you know, do they even wash their sheets? You know, what's going on? And now, you know, $1 billion company. So everyone, very smart people told them to get out of that business. It would never work. But they found a way to make it work anyways. So to me, that's the nature of those ideas, is they require breakthrough insights, and they require those kinds of failures coming along the way. The trick is doing it very quickly. So if you're waiting 6 months at a time and failing, those are like big emotional failures that are very hard to recover from. But if you're running experiments, which is what the language we use with Lean Startup, and you are running 2-week experiments and failing, you know, it's not fun, but it's less about failing and more about learning. So you can change faster.
Yeah, it's not fun at all. I mean, around the idea of failure, there is two opposite ideas actually. One is, as you mentioned, you have to fail quick as much as possible, but on the other side, there is the author of Zero to One, Peter Thiel, which says you have failure in general is a tragedy. You have to avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah.
And there's this discussion, which is the counterintuitive argument, which made me thought a lot about it. I wanted to have to pick your brain on this. You mentioned, as you rightly mentioned before, life is too short to build something that nobody wants, which is totally right. But it is, what I want to ask, is it a good idea to even start and build something, given the down market that we are experiencing right now?
Well, so I guess the first thing I would say that what we try to do is don't build first. So maybe I'll just correct that. Is that you can definitely test for something before you build. So in any market, good or bad, I wouldn't want to build something before I know that it's worth doing. And this goes back to the idea of time is the scarcest resource. Every entrepreneur, when we are younger, we feel like we have got a lot of time, but you start working on a startup, and 2 or 3 startups later, you're 10 years older. And then the value of time becomes, you know, you start to appreciate it. So to me, time is the thing that founders invest in. Investors invest with money, but the thing with money is that money is not as expensive as time, because you can print more money, you can get more money, you cannot get more time. So that's how I try to look at it, is that you have to kind of value your time in the ideas. So you have to do that. But your point about the down economy, the way one should look at it is that whenever there is crisis, whenever there is, you know, a down economy, there's generally a lot more opportunity as well. They two go hand in hand. And you mentioned, I think there's even a Chinese word, I don't know the actual word, I can never pronounce it, but it basically is a word for crisis and opportunity, and it's a dual meaning
Right.
word. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but that is essentially the way to look at it. And if you actually, people don't realize, I did a little email list to my audience, kind of pointing them to this article. But companies like you know, Apple, Microsoft, GE, GM, many well-known companies, even Uber, and there are a few others in that group, were all founded in down recessions, in like really bad markets. And they were founded there because that's where they could really shine. That's where they found an opportunity. When everyone was trying to maybe go into survival mode, they were trying something new and different, and they got a lot more attention, a lot more traction, were able to grow in those markets. So there's actually a very, very strong correlation between successful startups that we see and also the environment in which those ideas were incubated. There's a strong correlation there.
Yeah. Going back to the Chinese word, I think it's Wei Ji, which
Yeah,
it's a word can be divided in the translation, or the pinyin. Yeah, the pinyin is Wei Ji, and it's a word that has, as you mentioned, signifies danger, but also opportunity, respectively. And I wanted to ask, do you think which company or startup do you think has fully embraced the lean startup,
Mm.
continuous innovation, continuous experimentation methodology, despite the scale. If we
Yeah,
look at the
yeah,
big companies that we could not call them anymore startups.
yeah, yeah.
Point.
So yeah, so the examples I give are even pre-lean startups. A lot of people look for kind of the startups, but you find that many methodologies like continuous innovation or lean startup really codify, really make the principles known to a bigger audience. But there are companies who are practicing this kind of in their own way. So if I go back, if I look at a company like Facebook or even Amazon, Amazon was founded in 1994, Facebook in 2004, way before we were talking about these things. But right from the very beginning, they were using words like experiment and let's do a lot of iterations and let's try a lot of things. So the principles were there. Today we are practicing it with a stronger vocabulary. We've learned a lot of techniques. We've cataloged them, so more people, it's more accessible. But I would say that the principles have been around for a long time. So those would be like examples of companies at scale. But all those any company who is embracing fast feedback loops from customers, both qualitative and quantitative, to me gets into this mindset of continuous innovation. They're using customer learning to fuel their decisions versus the traditional, like if I build it, people will they will come type of mindset.
Yeah, so those companies have, to some degree, this mentality in their DNA, whereas other companies who have been in the game for longer, it's kind of it's harder to inject this kind of mentality and this kind of approach, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. So, and part of it is just habits, right? So this is where more recently I've been studying a lot of like habit, reading a lot of books on habit creation and habit loops and things. But at the end of the day, the culture of the company determines how it's like evolution. If you're a dinosaur, using that literal analogy, it's very hard to change. It doesn't mean you can't change, but it's harder. So bigger companies have that culture legacy that's hard to adjust, but you can find evidence of them in smaller pockets. Like they have innovation teams, and even within big companies, you're going to find the antibodies or maybe the mutants who are entrepreneurs inside a big organization, and they still do amazing things. So you'll find those kinds of things. It's just not mainstream culture, so it's harder to change the mainstream culture.
It's so-called entrepreneurs that are ready there, and they just need to be shown the right path. Um, I think I want to ask you, let's say wrap it up. And I want to ask, what is the hardest thing that you had to do as a founder?
Oh, I don't know where I'd start, but I think the hardest thing usually as founders, especially if you think of the idea creation phase, it's usually starts with one person. And if you are the solo founder doing it, it's probably a hard time because on the one hand, you're very excited, but on the other side, you're very lonely as well. Like you don't really have maybe a team with which to share it. And when you go and start sharing the idea with others, they may not understand it, they may not get it, so that can be very frustrating. So maybe I find that to me is still, getting people to see what you see can be the most exciting and frustrating thing for a founder to go through. And then once you can start people to get on board, then it becomes a lot of fun. But there are many solo founders that I work with, struggle with that, and I can have a lot of appreciation for that challenge. It's definitely a hard thing. And that's kind of getting going. There are, of course, all kinds of challenges along the way, like, feeding, basically getting revenue, selling. There are all kinds of ups and downs that we all know are par for the course in the entrepreneurial journey.
Ash, that's so insightful. I think also you have where as long as you have an idea, try to put it out there and find the right people to poke on your idea and find holes and give you perspective from a different angle what may not work on it.
Yeah. Well, I guess it just goes back to sharing. So if ideas are best when they're shared, you don't have to share. Founders get too scared about sharing their secret sauce. And the thing is, most people don't care how your idea works. They want to know what your idea does. So if you focus on that piece, you can share your idea very openly. I can come to you and I can say, I can teach you Chinese in 30 days. That's what I want to share with you. How, I'm not going to tell you, like that's the secret sauce. but I'll share the idea with you. And if you like it, come and be a customer, come and use my product. That you should be sharing, and you can get lots of conversations around.
Is there like I'll not even call it methodology, but a way to generate new ideas continuously? Like for a business, it could be for anything. Do you have any, I'd say,
Yeah, that's out of my core expertise. Like I actually come into play when you have the idea. I'm more the person that can tell you how to test whether it's good or bad very quickly. But how you, and I also, because there are people who have like methodologies, which is you can look at analogs, you can look at markets, you can find trends, you can do all these things, and there is stuff out there. I'm less interested in the idea generation. So how it happens, there are many ways, and sometimes it's just you're in the shower or you're driving on the highway and boom, you get an idea. I'm more interested in what you do afterwards in the testing phase. And I found many ideas that just came out like in a dream, and they became like very, very successful because somehow they just enter someone's mind. Others take more research and analysis. So yeah.
And I remember I was reading some of your blog, and as you mentioned, one of the reasons that many startups fail is that they actually don't even start or don't even try to execute on the ideas. So basically, they're dead ideas to some degree. And I found that, wow, that's actually that's a good reason. What are you currently working on, and where can people find more about you and your books? Because you have a second one. I think it's called.
Yeah, there's a second book, Scaling Lean, and technically a third one in the work. So this has been a body of work. It started almost 10 years ago. Running Lean was the first book, where I introduced some ideas, which then created more problems, and then I wrote the second book to answer some of those problems or questions, which created yet more problems. So I think with the third one, I feel like I've created a three-part kind of trilogy with the framework to where I can now better be able to guide some of the teams from ideation to that product market fit stage. And so we took that learning and we have turned it into a platform. So we run LeanStack. So LeanStack is the company that I run, but we have a lot of that content also available online. So what I'm working on these days is scaling that. So we look at the framework using the language that we were using earlier has hit product market fit. It's less about new canvases or new ways of doing things, more about now engines of growth. So we are working a lot on partnering. We're working a lot on finding scalable channels, whether it's direct to the entrepreneur or using paths like accelerators or corporates. But those are like areas where we are focused on, is really scaling our thinking and our tools more than trying to improve them at this point.
Are you planning to move to Europe, since you mentioned you're planning to work with accelerators? Or in China to some degree?
No. I think the amazing thing is that, and now even more so with this pandemic crisis upon us, is that people are being forced to move virtual. We have been I think you're a virtual company we were talking about before we started. I've been virtual for almost 15, 20 years as well. Like all the startups I've done have run this way. So I find that I don't need to move anywhere. I mean, you're in Italy, I'm in Austin, we're talking video, we can see each other. So yeah, I feel that one doesn't need to move anywhere these days. You can do what you need to from wherever you are, as long as you have the internet.
So we can end our podcast on this note. Ash, Maurya, thank you for joining the Founders Club podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.